The letter, trembling in Helena Porter's gloved hands, promised a new life in Silver Creek, Montana. But the conductor's gruff voice had just announced their arrival in Fargo, North Dakota, and her trunk was already being tossed onto the dusty platform below. She pressed her face against the cool glass window, watching the small frontier town materialize through the haze of late afternoon heat. This was wrong, all wrong. Silver Creek was supposed to be the next stop. Another 2 hours north according to the schedule she had memorized during her 3-day journey from Philadelphia. But the train was already lurching forward, steam billowing past her window as it prepared to depart, and her belongings were sitting on the platform alongside several other passengers who had disembarked. Wait. Helena grabbed her carpetbag and stumbled down the aisle, her traveling dress catching on the worn seats. Please, there's been a mistake. But the train was already moving, picking up speed with each rotation of its massive wheels. The conductor, who had removed her trunk, was nowhere to be seen, probably already in another car checking tickets. Helena stood on the platform, her heart hammering against her ribs, watching the train disappear into the distance until it was nothing more than a dark smudge against the pale Dakota sky. The platform emptied quickly. The other passengers were greeted by family members or hired hands, leaving Helena alone with her trunk and carpetbag in a town she had never intended to visit. She pulled the letter from her reticule and read it again, as if the words might have changed. Dear Miss Porter, your arrival in Silver Creek is eagerly anticipated. I will be waiting at the station on the afternoon of August 15th. Yours in anticipation, Mr. Charles Whitmore. Today was August 15th, 1882, but she was in Fargo, not Silver Creek. And Charles Whitmore was waiting for a bride who would never arrive. Helena sank onto her trunk, fighting back tears. She had left everything behind in Philadelphia, her position as a seamstress in her aunt's dress shop, her tiny room in a boarding house that smelled of boiled cabbage and disappointment, the endless parade of days that all looked exactly the same. When she had seen the advertisement for mail-order brides in the newspaper, something inside her had stirred to life. Charles Whitmore's letters had been kind and thoughtful. He was a banker, he wrote, established and respectable. He promised her a comfortable home and a fresh start. Now she was stranded in the wrong town with $17 to her name and no way to reach her intended husband. Madam. You all right there? Helena looked up to find a man standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of a summer storm. Dust covered his boots and the lower half of his denim trousers, and he wore a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. A working man, she thought. A cowboy, probably from one of the ranches outside town. I'm fine, she said, though her voice wavered. Just a small problem with my travel arrangements. He glanced at her trunk, then at the empty tracks. Looks like more than a small problem, if you don't mind me saying. That train won't be back through until tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow, the word came out as barely more than a whisper. Charles would be waiting at the Silver Creek station right now, watching passengers disembark, searching for a woman he had never met based only on the photograph she had sent and her description of herself. When she did not appear, what would he think? That she had changed her mind. That she was a fraud who had never intended to come at all. Name's Dalton Reeves, the cowboy said, moving a step closer. I work the Bar 7 ranch about 10 miles west of here. I was in town picking up supplies when I saw you standing here looking lost. Helena Porter. She stood and brushed imaginary dust from her skirt, trying to compose herself. I was supposed to continue on to Silver Creek. There was some confusion about the stops. Dalton's expression shifted, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're a mail-order bride." It was not quite a question, but Helena nodded anyway. There was no point in pretending otherwise. "I'm supposed to meet my intended husband today. He'll think I'm not coming." "Silver Creek's got a telegraph office," Dalton said. "So does Fargo. You could wire him, let him know what happened." Relief flooded through her. Of course, a telegram. Why had she not thought of that immediately? "Yes. Yes, that's perfect. Where is the telegraph office? I'll show you." Dalton picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing and started walking. Helena grabbed her carpetbag and hurried after him, her traveling boots clicking against the wooden planks of the platform. Fargo was smaller than Philadelphia, but larger than she had expected for a frontier town. Main Street stretched out before them, lined with false-fronted buildings housing a general store, a hotel, a saloon, a land office, and various other establishments. Wooden sidewalks connected the buildings, and the street itself was hard-packed dirt rutted with wagon wheel tracks. Men in dusty work clothes moved in and out of the saloon, while a group of women in calico dresses stood outside the general store, their voices carrying on the warm afternoon air. The telegraph office occupied a corner of the land office, a small desk, and the mysterious clicking machine that could send messages across hundreds of miles in seconds. An elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up as they entered. "Afternoon, Dalton," he said, then nodded politely to Helena. "Madam." "Afternoon, Mr. Patterson. Lady needs to send a telegram to Silver Creek." Helena approached the desk and carefully counted out coins from her small purse. "I need to reach Mr. Charles Whitmore in Silver Creek, Montana." "Can you do that?" "Sure can." Mr. Patterson pulled out a form and dipped his pen in ink. "What's the message?" Helena dictated carefully, explaining that she had disembarked at the wrong stop and would arrive on tomorrow's train. She included an apology and a reassurance that she still intended to honor their agreement. When she finished, Mr. Patterson counted the words and named a price that made her wince, nearly $2 for a simple message. But what choice did she have? She paid and watched as the telegraph operator's fingers flew over the keys, translating her words into the mysterious dots and dashes that would carry them north to Montana. When he finished, he looked up and smiled kindly. "Should reach Silver Creek within the hour," he said. "Their office is right next to the station, so if your intended is still waiting there, he'll get word quick." "Thank you." Helena felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. At least Charles would know she had not abandoned him. Back on the street, Dalton still held her trunk. "You'll need a place to stay tonight. The Fargo Hotel is clean and reasonable." "How reasonable?" Helena asked, calculating what remained of her money. $2 for a room, probably another $1 for dinner. That would leave her with less than $12. Not much to start a new life with, but it would have to do. "The hotel, then. Thank you for your help, Mr. Reeves." "Dalton," he corrected. "And it's no trouble." He carried her trunk to the hotel, a 2-story building with a covered porch and lace curtains in the windows. The proprietress, a round woman with kind eyes and flour on her apron, checked Helena in and led her to a small room on the second floor. It was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking Main Street. When the proprietress left, Helena sank onto the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. Not loud sobs, just quiet tears that slipped down her cheeks and dripped onto her collar. She was exhausted from days of travel, frightened by the uncertainty of her situation, and overwhelmed by the strangeness of everything around her. Philadelphia seemed impossibly far away, a different world entirely. A knock at the door interrupted her tears. She wiped her eyes quickly and opened it to find Dalton standing in the hallway with her trunk. "Thought you might want this," he said. "Oh, yes, thank you." She stepped aside to let him maneuver the trunk into the room. "I appreciate your kindness." Dalton set the trunk down and turned to face her. In the small room, he seemed even taller, his presence filling the space. "Look, Miss Porter, I don't mean to be forward, but you seem like you could use a friend in town. Mrs. Anderson downstairs serves a good dinner at 6. If you're not otherwise engaged, I'd be happy to buy you a meal, just as a welcome to North Dakota." Helena hesitated. Back in Philadelphia, accepting such an invitation from a stranger would have been scandalous. But this was not Philadelphia, and she was not the same timid seamstress who had left 3 days ago. Besides, she was hungry, and the thought of eating alone in her room held no appeal. "That's very kind," she said. "I accept." Dalton's face broke into a smile that transformed his rather serious features. 6 o'clock, then. I'll meet you downstairs." After he left, Helena unpacked a fresh dress and did her best to make herself presentable. She washed the travel dust from her face and hands, repinned her dark blonde hair, and changed into a blue calico dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Looking at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, she hardly recognized the woman staring back. She looked braver than she felt. At 6 o'clock, she descended the stairs to find Dalton waiting in the lobby. He had cleaned up as well, changing into a fresh shirt and combing his dark hair back from his face. When he saw her, something flickered in his eyes that made her heart skip strangely. The dining room was small but cozy, with checkered tablecloths and oil lamps casting warm light over everything. Mrs. Anderson served them thick beef stew with fresh bread, followed by apple pie that melted on Helena's tongue. It was simple food, but after days of train meals, it tasted like heaven. "So you're from Philadelphia," Dalton said, breaking a piece of bread. "That's a long way to come." "It is," Helena agreed, "but there wasn't much keeping me there. My parents died of influenza 5 years ago. I've been working for my aunt ever since, sewing dresses for ladies who barely acknowledge my existence. When I saw the advertisement for Western brides, it seemed like a sign. And this Charles Whitmore, what do you know about him?" Helena took a sip of water, considering her answer. "He's a banker in Silver Creek. 32 years old, never married. He owns a house in town. His letters were kind. But you've never met him?" "No." Dalton was quiet for a moment, his storm-colored eyes thoughtful. "That takes courage, coming all this way to marry a stranger." "Or desperation," Helena said, surprising herself with her honesty. "Maybe both." "Nothing wrong with wanting something different," Dalton said. "I came to Dakota Territory 8 years ago with nothing but a horse and a bedroll. Worked cattle drives, hired on at different ranches, saved every penny. Last year I bought my own place. Not much yet, just 160 acres and a small herd, but it's mine." There was pride in his voice, and Helena found herself leaning forward, genuinely interested. "You have your own ranch, working on it. Still help out at the Bar 7 to make ends meet, but my place is starting to take shape. Built a cabin last summer. This spring I'll add on, maybe get some chickens, plant a bigger garden." He stopped, looking slightly embarrassed. "Sorry. I get talking about the ranch and forget myself." "No, please. It sounds wonderful, building something of your own." Helena felt a pang of envy. Dalton was creating his future with his own hands, while she was simply throwing herself at a stranger and hoping for the best. They talked through dinner and into the evening, conversation flowing easily. Dalton told her about life on the Dakota plains, about roundups and branding, about bitter winters and summer storms that rolled across the grasslands like freight trains. Helena told him about Philadelphia, about the rhythm of city life, about bolts of silk and lace and the endless tiny stitches that had strained her eyes in her aunt's dim workroom. "You miss it?" Dalton asked. "The city?" Helena considered the question seriously. "I miss knowing where everything is. I miss feeling competent. But do I miss the life I had? No, not at all. The West has a way of making people feel small at first," Dalton said. "All that space, all that sky, but it also makes you feel free in a way nothing else can. You'll understand once you get to Silver Creek." Silver Creek, Charles Whitmore, her intended husband waiting for a bride he had never met. The thought, which should have filled her with anticipation, instead made her stomach twist uncomfortably. "What's wrong?" Dalton asked, too perceptive by half. "Nothing. Just tired from the journey." But it was not nothing, and they both knew it. Helena excused herself and climbed the stairs to her room, confused by the conflicting emotions swirling inside her. She should be thinking about Charles, about her future in Silver Creek. Instead, she found her thoughts returning again and again to storm-colored eyes and a smile that made her heart behave strangely. She slept poorly, dreams filled with trains and telegraphs and endless prairies stretching toward a horizon she could never quite reach. When she woke, pale dawn light was filtering through her window. She dressed carefully in her traveling clothes, packed her few belongings, and carried her carpetbag downstairs. Dalton was waiting in the lobby. "The train doesn't leave until noon," Helena said, startled to see him. "I know. Thought you might like to see a bit of Fargo before you go." "If you're interested." She should say no. She should stay in the hotel and wait quietly for the train like a proper lady. But the morning stretched before her, empty and anxious, and the thought of walking through town with Dalton was far more appealing than sitting alone with her increasingly confused thoughts. "I'd like that," she said. They walked through Fargo as the town was waking up. Shopkeepers swept their stoops. A milk wagon rattled past. The smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakery, mingling with the earthy scent of horses and the ever-present dust. Dalton showed her the general store, the church at the end of Main Street, the schoolhouse with its bell tower and fenced yard. "Fargo's growing," he said. "When I first came through 8 years ago, it was half this size. Railroad brought more people, more businesses. It's becoming a real town." They walked down to the Red River, which gave the valley its name. The water moved sluggishly in the summer heat, reflecting the pale morning sky. Cottonwood trees grew along the banks, their leaves rustling in the slight breeze. "It's beautiful," Helena said softly. "Different from Philadelphia, I imagine. Completely different." She turned to look at him. "Thank you for this, for helping me yesterday, for dinner, for this morning. You didn't have to be kind to a stranger. Seems to me the West needs more kindness, not less." Dalton picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the water, 3 hops before it sank. "Besides, you're not really a stranger anymore." Helena opened her mouth to respond, but a shout from town interrupted her. They turned to see a young boy running toward them, waving his arms. "Mr. Reeves." "Mr. Reeves. Mr. Patterson at the telegraph office says you need to come quick. There's a message." Dalton and Helena hurried back to town, following the boy to the telegraph office. Mr. Patterson looked up as they entered, his expression grave. "Message came through about an hour ago," he said, handing Helena a slip of paper. "From Silver Creek." Helena's hands shook as she read the brief message. The words seemed to blur and swim before her eyes. "Miss Porter, stop. Regret circumstances have changed. Stop. Cannot proceed with marriage plans. Stop. Apologies for any inconvenience. Stop. Charles Whitmore." The paper slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. Cannot proceed with marriage plans. After she had traveled nearly 2,000 miles. After she had left everything behind. After she had committed herself to a new life. Helena, Dalton's voice seemed to come from very far away. He doesn't want me. Her own voice sounded strange, hollow. I got off at the wrong stop and now he doesn't want me. Dalton picked up the telegram and read it, his jaw tightening. This is wrong. You had an agreement. An agreement he's chosen not to honor. Helena forced herself to breathe, to think. I need to send a reply, ask him to reconsider, explain that it was just a simple mistake. Mr. Patterson looked uncomfortable. I can send it, madam, but another message came through about 20 minutes ago, from a Miss Sarah Winters. She arrived in Silver Creek yesterday from Kansas City. Seems Mr. Whitmore made arrangements with her as well. She got there first and, well, he married her this morning. The words hit Helena like physical blows. Married. This morning. Charles Whitmore had not simply changed his mind. He had been corresponding with multiple women, and he had married the one who arrived first, like she was nothing more than a piece of goods to be claimed by whoever got to the store earliest. I need some air, Helena said faintly. She walked out of the telegraph office on unsteady legs. The morning sunlight felt too bright, the street too wide and exposed. Behind her, she heard Dalton speaking to Mr. Patterson in a low, angry voice, but she could not focus on his words. Everything had narrowed to a single, terrible realization. She was stranded in Fargo, North Dakota, with less than $12 to her name, no prospects, no position, and no way to return to Philadelphia. She could not go back to her aunt, who had told her she was a fool for chasing fairy tales. She had burned that bridge thoroughly when she left. And without enough money for train fare, she could not even try. Dalton found her sitting on a bench outside the hotel, staring at nothing. He sat down beside her, close but not touching. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Whitmore's a coward and a scoundrel. You deserve better. What I deserve doesn't seem to matter much at the moment. Helena heard the bitterness in her voice but could not contain it. What am I going to do? Stay in Fargo? She turned to look at him, certain she had misheard. What? Stay here. There's work in town. Mrs. Anderson might need help at the hotel. Or if you're as good with a needle as you say, half the ranch wives in the county would pay for a seamstress. The West is short on skilled labor, especially women's work. I can't just stay. I don't know anyone. I have nowhere to live. You know me. Dalton said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. And Mrs. Anderson rents rooms by the week. It's not Philadelphia, and it's not the comfortable banker's wife life you were expecting, but it's something. A chance to figure out what comes next. Helena wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Yesterday, she had been on a train, nervous but hopeful about her future as Mrs. Charles Whitmore. Today, she was being advised to stay in a town she had never heard of, until yesterday by a cowboy she had known for less than 24 hours. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked. You don't owe me anything. Dalton was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the dusty street. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. Maybe because I know what it's like to start over with nothing. Maybe because I can see you're brave enough to build a new life, even if it's not the one you planned. Or maybe because from the moment I saw you sitting on that trunk looking lost and scared and determined all at once, I wanted to help you, wanted to know you, wanted to see you smile. Helena's breath caught. There was something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, that made her heart race and her skin flush warm despite the morning heat. I can't ask you to take responsibility for me, she said softly. You're not asking. I'm offering. And I'm not talking about responsibility. I'm talking about friendship. A helping hand while you find your feet. Nothing more than that unless... He stopped, shook his head. Unless you want it to be. Helena looked at this man beside her, this near stranger who had shown her more genuine kindness in one day than Charles Whitmore had in 3 months of carefully composed letters. Dalton asked nothing of her except that she stay and give herself a chance. There was no pressure, no expectation. Just an open hand extended across the space between them. "I don't know anything about living in the West," she said. "You'll learn. I've never lived anywhere but Philadelphia. Time to see what else the world has to offer. I'm scared. That's all right." Brave and scared can exist at the same time. Helena took a deep breath and made her decision. 1 week. I'll stay 1 week and see if I can find work. If I can't, I'll have to figure out something else. The smile that broke across Dalton's face was like sunrise. 1 week. That's all I'm asking. They returned to the hotel, where Mrs. Anderson agreed to rent Helena a room for $5 a week, meals included. It would use up most of her remaining money, but it bought her time. Time to think, to plan, to decide what she really wanted from her new life in the West. Dalton had to return to the Bar 7 ranch that afternoon. Before he left, he pressed a piece of paper into Helena's hand with directions to his property. "If you need anything, anything at all, that's where I'll be," he said. "I'll come into town on Saturday. Maybe we could have dinner again." "I'd like that," Helena said, and meant it. She spent the rest of the day exploring Fargo more thoroughly. The general store was run by a friendly couple named the Johnsons, who welcomed her warmly when she introduced herself. Mrs. Johnson examined the embroidery on Helena's collar with an expert eye. "You did this yourself?" she asked. "Yes, madam. I was a seamstress in Philadelphia." "Well, you're skilled. Real skilled. You know, my daughter's getting married next month and she's been fretting about her wedding dress. The woman who usually does our sewing moved to Bismarck last spring. Would you be interested in taking on the work?" Helena could hardly believe her luck. Yes, absolutely." They discussed details, and Mrs. Johnson showed her the fabric she had ordered for her daughter, a beautiful cream-colored wool suitable for a winter wedding. Helena's fingers itched to work with it, to create something lovely from the raw material. They agreed on a price that seemed almost generous, and Helena left the store feeling lighter than she had all day. Over the next few days, word spread that a skilled seamstress had arrived in town. Women began appearing at the hotel, bringing fabric and describing the dresses or alterations they needed. Helena set up a small workspace in her room and threw herself into the work. It felt good to be useful, to be building something with her own skills rather than waiting for some man to give her life meaning. On Saturday evening, Dalton arrived as promised. He had cleaned up again, and Helena noticed he wore a new shirt, deep green that brought out the color of his eyes. They had dinner at the hotel, and afterward he asked if she would like to take a walk. The summer evening was warm and long, the sun painting the western sky in shades of amber and rose. They walked beyond the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. Grasshoppers sang in the tall grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "How was your week?" Dalton asked. "Better than I expected." Helena told him about the wedding dress, about the other work that had come her way, about how Mrs. Anderson had asked her to help mend linens in exchange for a discount on her room. "I think I can actually make this work, make a life here. I'm glad." There was warmth in Dalton's voice and something else, something that made Helena's pulse quicken. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the town falling away behind them. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, and above them, the first stars were beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. "Can I tell you something?" Dalton said finally. "Of course." "I'm glad the train made that mistake. Glad you got off at the wrong stop. I know that's a terrible thing to say, because I know you're hurt and your plans got ruined. But if that train hadn't stopped here, if you'd gone on to Silver Creek and married Charles Whitmore, I never would have met you. And meeting you, Helena, That's been the best thing that's happened to me in a long time." Helena stopped walking and turned to face him. In the gathering twilight, his features were shadowed but his eyes were bright, fixed on her face with an intensity that stole her breath. "I feel the same way," she whispered, "and that confuses me terribly because I barely know you." "Then let's fix that. Let me court you properly. Let me show you my ranch, introduce you to my friends, teach you about this place. Let me see if what I'm feeling is real and let you figure out if you might feel it too." Her heart was hammering now, loud in her ears. "And if I say yes, what then?" "Then we take it slow. We get to know each other, we see where it leads. No pressure, no promises. Just two people seeing if they might fit together." Helena thought about Charles Whitmore's careful letters, his banker's precision in arranging a marriage like a business transaction. Then she thought about Dalton's kindness, his easy smile, the way he looked at her like she was someone worth knowing. There was no comparison. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that very much." Dalton stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek gently. "I'm going to kiss you now, if that's all right." Helena's breath caught. "Yes." His lips met hers softly, tentatively at first, then with growing warmth. Helena's eyes fluttered closed as she leaned into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heartbeat under her palms, as rapid as her own. The kiss was nothing like she had imagined her first kiss would be. It was better. It was real and honest and filled with a tenderness that made her want to cry. When they finally pulled apart, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you," he murmured. "You should have told me sooner," Helena said, and was rewarded with his laugh, warm and genuine. They walked back to town hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. Dalton told her about his plans for the ranch, about the struggles and small victories of building something from raw land. Helena told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her parents and the hole their deaths had left in her life. They talked until Mrs. Anderson appeared on the hotel porch and pointedly cleared her throat, reminding them of the proprieties. Dalton came into town twice more that week, and each visit deepened the connection growing between them. On Wednesday, he brought her wildflowers picked from the prairie, their bright faces cheerful in a glass jar on her windowsill. On Sunday, they attended church together, sitting side by side on the hard wooden pew while the rest of the congregation whispered and speculated about the new seamstress and the young rancher who was courting her. 3 weeks after Helena's unplanned arrival in Fargo, Dalton drove up to the hotel in a wagon and asked if she would like to see his ranch. Helena had just finished the Johnson wedding dress and was free for the afternoon. She tied on her bonnet and climbed up beside him, excitement and nervousness fluttering in her stomach. The ride took nearly an hour, following a rutted track across the rolling prairie. The land here was not flat as Helena had imagined, but gently undulating, with occasional stands of cottonwood trees marking the presence of creeks and draws. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the tawny grass. Hawks circled overhead, riding the thermal currents. "There," Dalton said, pointing ahead. "That's my land." Helena saw a small cabin nestled in a fold of land near a creek. It was rough-hewn but solid, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Nearby stood a barn and a corral holding several horses. A garden plot had been fenced off, and she could see rows of green plants growing there. "It's wonderful," she said sincerely. Dalton helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. He showed her around with obvious pride. The cabin was simple, just 2 rooms and a loft, but he had built it himself. The barn housed 3 horses and had space for more. The garden was producing squash, beans, and potatoes. He planned to add chickens in the spring, maybe a milk cow. "It's not much yet," he said, a trace of anxiety in his voice. "But it will be. In a few years, I'll have a real house, a bigger herd, maybe some hired hands to help with the work." "It's already something," Helena said. "It's a home. A real home that you built with your own hands. That's more than most people ever have." They sat on the porch steps, sharing the lunch Mrs. Anderson had packed. The creek burbled nearby, and the wind made soft sounds in the tall grass. It was peaceful in a way Philadelphia had never been, even in its quietest moments. "I can see us here," Dalton said suddenly. "You and me. I know it's too soon to say such things, but I can't help it. I look at this place and I don't just see what it is. I see what it could be. A real ranch with a proper house. Children playing in the yard. You sewing on the porch while I work the cattle. Growing old together in the place we built." Helena's throat tightened with emotion. "You see all that?" "I do. Clear as day, if you'll have me. If you'll take a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than dollars and a half-built ranch in the middle of nowhere." She turned to look at him, this good man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to pray. "I spent 3 months exchanging letters with Charles Whitmore and learned nothing about who he really was. I've spent 3 weeks knowing you, and I feel like I've known you forever. That should scare me, but it doesn't. It feels right. Is that a yes?" "That's a maybe becoming a yes," Helena said with a smile. "Ask me again in a few more weeks, when I've seen you in the rain and the cold and when things go wrong. Ask me when I've had time to be sure this isn't just gratitude or relief at escaping a bad situation." Dalton grinned. "Fair enough. I can be patient. And just so you know, I'm every bit as stubborn and difficult when things go wrong as I am charming and handsome when things go right." Helena laughed. "Charming and handsome. Your humility is overwhelming." "I'm a work in progress," he admitted and kissed her again, sweet and slow in the afternoon sunshine. The summer days shortened toward autumn, and Helena's life in Fargo took shape around her. Her seamstress business grew steadily. She sewed dresses for weddings and church, altered men's suits, mended everything from work shirts to fancy tablecloths. The money was not much, but it was enough. She could pay her room at the hotel and still save a little each week. Dalton came to town whenever his ranch work allowed, which was nearly every day as harvest season ended and the autumn work slowed. They fell into a comfortable rhythm of courtship. Dinners at the hotel, walks along the river, quiet conversations on the hotel porch while Mrs. Anderson pretended not to watch from inside. Helena met Dalton's friends from the Bar 7 ranch, good men who treated her with respect and teased Dalton mercilessly about being smitten. Dalton met the townspeople Helena had befriended, and she saw the way they approved of him, of his honest manner and steady character. In October, the first cold snap arrived, bringing frost that killed the last of the garden plants and sent the cattle seeking shelter. Dalton worked long hours preparing his ranch for winter, cutting hay, repairing fences, making sure everything was secure before the serious cold arrived. Helena helped where she could, riding out to the ranch on Saturdays to cook meals while Dalton worked. She learned to bake bread in the cast-iron stove, to make stew that could simmer all day, to preserve the last vegetables from the garden. The domestic tasks felt different here than they had in Philadelphia. There, she had worked to survive. Here, she was building something, contributing to a future that felt increasingly like hers. One Saturday in late October, after a long day of work, Dalton and Helena sat on the cabin porch wrapped in blankets against the evening chill. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the prairie with fire. "I love you," Dalton said quietly. Helena's heart stopped, then started again faster. "What? I love you," he repeated, turning to face her. I know we said we'd take it slow, and I'm not trying to rush you. But I can't keep it inside anymore. I love you, Helena. I love your strength and your courage. I love the way you laugh and the way you concentrate when you're sewing. I love how you dove into this new life without looking back. I love everything about you, and I needed you to know. Tears pricked Helena's eyes. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for weeks, but I was afraid to say it, afraid it was too fast, too soon, afraid I was making another mistake. This isn't a mistake. Dalton pulled her close, and Helena rested her head on his shoulder. This is the realest thing I've ever known. They sat in silence as the stars emerged one by one overhead, the vast Dakota sky spreading endlessly above them. Helena felt a peace she had never known in Philadelphia, a sense of being exactly where she was meant to be. "Marry me," Dalton said. Helena pulled back to look at him. "Are you asking or telling?" "Asking. Definitely asking. Marry me, Helena, not because you need a husband or a home, but because we love each other and want to build a life together. Marry me and help me turn this ranch into a real home. Grow old with me out here under this big sky. Say yes." "Yes," Helena said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." Dalton kissed her thoroughly, and when they finally pulled apart, both were grinning like fools. They stayed on the porch talking until the cold drove them inside, making plans for their future. They would marry in December, after the last of the autumn work was done. Helena would move out to the ranch, and they would build their life together. She could continue her seamstress work, and he would expand the ranch. It would not be easy, but they would face it together. The news of their engagement spread through Fargo quickly. Mrs. Anderson cried and hugged Helena, declaring she had known from the first day that Dalton was the right man. The Johnsons offered to host the wedding breakfast at the general store. Women Helena had sewn for offered to help with her dress, with the food, with whatever she needed. Helena wrote a letter to her aunt in Philadelphia, brief but polite, informing her of the engagement. She did not expect a reply and did not receive one. That part of her life was truly over, and she found she did not mind at all. November brought snow, light at first but increasing as the month progressed. Helena spent her days sewing her wedding dress, a simple but elegant design in deep blue wool that would be practical for the ceremony and useful afterward. She embroidered white flowers along the collar and cuffs, taking her time to make each stitch perfect. Dalton spent every moment he could spare with her, though the ranch work did not stop for courtship or wedding preparations. He brought in his last load of hay, secured the barn against winter storms, and began planning the additions he would make to the cabin in the spring. A proper bedroom for them, a workroom where Helena could sew, maybe a sitting room if resources allowed. On a cold afternoon in early December, exactly 4 months after Helena had stepped off the train in Fargo, she stood in the small church at the end of Main Street, wearing her blue wool dress and holding a bouquet of dried wildflowers. Dalton stood beside her in his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his storm-colored eyes shining with joy. The church was full. It seemed half the town had turned out to witness the wedding of the seamstress and the cowboy, the mail-order bride who had gotten off at the wrong stop and found something better than she had dreamed possible. The minister, a kind elderly man with a gentle voice, led them through their vows. Helena promised to love and honor Dalton, to stand beside him through whatever the future brought. Dalton promised to cherish and protect Helena, to build a home worthy of her and a life they could be proud of together. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Dalton kissed her softly while the congregation applauded. The wedding breakfast at the general store was a lively affair. Mrs. Johnson had outdone herself with food, and someone produced a fiddle for dancing. Helena danced with her new husband, laughing as he spun her around the crowded room. She danced with Mr. Johnson and with some of the ranch hands Dalton had invited. She accepted congratulations and well wishes from people who had been strangers 4 months ago and were now her community, her people. As the afternoon faded toward evening, Dalton helped Helena into the wagon for the ride out to the ranch. Their ranch now, she thought with a thrill. Their home. The cabin looked beautiful when they arrived. Someone, probably Dalton, had hung evergreen boughs over the door and built up a fire in the stove, so the interior was warm and welcoming. Helena's trunk and belongings had been brought out earlier in the week, and her sewing basket sat in the corner like it had always been there. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reeves," Dalton said, lifting her over the threshold. Helena kissed him. "It's perfect. You're perfect. All of this is perfect." That night, lying in Dalton's arms in the small cabin bed, listening to the wind whistle across the prairie, Helena thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. If the train had not stopped in Fargo, if Charles Whitmore had not been a faithless coward, if Dalton had not been standing on that platform at exactly the right moment, her entire life would be different. She would be in Silver Creek, married to a man she did not love, living a life that was not truly hers. "What are you thinking about?" Dalton murmured sleepily. "Getting off at the wrong stop," Helena said, "and how it turned out to be exactly the right stop after all." Dalton pulled her closer. "Best mistake that train ever made." Winter settled over the Dakota prairie with a vengeance. Snow piled in drifts around the cabin, and the temperature dropped until Helena's breath formed clouds inside if she let the fire die down. But the cabin was snug, well built by Dalton's capable hands, and Helena discovered she did not mind the isolation. She had grown up in a city surrounded by thousands of people and had been lonely every day. Here, miles from the nearest neighbor with only Dalton for company most days, she felt less alone than she ever had in her life. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Dalton tended the horses and cattle, breaking ice on the water tanks, hauling hay, checking fences. Helena cooked and cleaned, sewed orders that women brought out from town, or that Dalton carried back when he went in for supplies, and learned the 1,000 small skills needed to survive on a prairie ranch. She learned to read the weather in the color of the sky and the behavior of the animals. She learned which plants could be gathered even in winter for medicinal teas. She learned to bake bread that rose properly in the altitude, to make soap, to render tallow, to stretch every resource because waste was not an option out here. In the evenings, they sat by the fire. Dalton carved or mended tack while Helena sewed. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their plans for the ranch. Dalton taught her to play checkers, and Helena taught him simple embroidery stitches. Sometimes they just sat in companionable silence, the kind of silence that only exists between people who are truly comfortable together. On the coldest nights, when the wind howled and snow rattled against the windows, they made love under piled quilts, learning each other's bodies, discovering the joy of physical intimacy combined with genuine love. Helena had known such things existed, but experiencing them was different from knowing about them. Dalton was gentle and patient, putting her pleasure before his own, and Helena blossomed under his care. In February, a blizzard trapped them inside for 3 days. The snow fell so thickly they could not see the barn from the cabin windows. Dalton strung a rope from the cabin to the barn so he could tend the animals without getting lost, and Helena worried every moment he was outside, terrified he would not find his way back. But he always did, stomping snow from his boots and hanging his frozen coat by the fire. They played cards and told stories and made love to pass the time. Helena had never been happier. When the storm finally broke, and brilliant sunshine reflected off acres of fresh snow, she stood on the porch breathing the crystal air and marveling at the beauty of this hard land that had become her home. Spring arrived slowly, as if reluctant to relinquish winter's grip. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass that gradually turned green. The creek swelled with runoff, rushing and musical. Birds returned in waves, filling the air with song. Dalton began the planned additions to the cabin. He hired 2 men from town to help with the heavy work, and Helena cooked enormous meals to feed them. The sound of hammering and sawing filled the days. Slowly, the cabin grew. A proper bedroom took shape on one side, large enough for a real bed and a wardrobe. On the other side, a workroom with windows on 2 walls gave Helena the light she needed for her sewing. In April, Dalton brought home a crate of cheeping chicks that Helena raised in a box by the stove until they were large enough to survive in the new coop Dalton built. She loved those ridiculous birds with their frantic energy and soft feathers, loved collecting warm eggs every morning. In May, Helena realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. She waited another week to be sure, then told Dalton over breakfast one sunny morning. He dropped his fork. "A baby, we're having a baby, I think so, probably late November or early December." Dalton was around the table in an instant, pulling her into his arms. "A baby," he kept repeating, wonder in his voice. "We're having a baby." Helena laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. A year ago, she had been a lonely seamstress in Philadelphia, convinced her life would never amount to more than sewing other women's dresses. Now she was a rancher's wife in Dakota Territory, carrying his child, building a life that was wholly and completely hers. The pregnancy progressed easily. Helena felt well, her only complaint a bone-deep tiredness in the first months that gradually faded. Her belly swelled, and Dalton treated her like she was made of glass, which she found both endearing and exasperating. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she said when he tried to prevent her from carrying water from the well. "You're carrying our child," he said seriously. "You're the most precious thing in my life. Let me help." How could she argue with that? The additions to the cabin were finished by July. Helena set up her workroom with deep satisfaction, arranging her sewing supplies and bolts of fabric. The extra money from her seamstress work was helping build the ranch's savings, and she took pride in her contribution. In August, Dalton hired a young man named Peter to help with the autumn work. Peter was 19, fresh from Iowa, eager to learn ranching. He slept in the barn and ate meals with Dalton and Helena, and his youthful enthusiasm made Helena feel very grown up and maternal despite being only 24. As autumn arrived and her belly grew heavy with child, Helena found herself thinking often about that day a year ago when she had stepped off the train in Fargo. Sometimes she wondered about Charles Whitmore and his bride from Kansas City. Were they happy? Did they love each other? She hoped so, but she could not regret how things had turned out. Charles Whitmore had rejected her, and in doing so had given her the greatest gift imaginable. He had left her free to find Dalton. In late November, on a cold, clear night with stars bright as diamonds overhead, Helena's pains began. Dalton rode through the darkness to fetch Mrs. Anderson, who had experience with birthing, while Helena paced the cabin and tried not to panic. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Helena had never known such pain, such exhaustion, but Mrs. Anderson was calm and capable, and Dalton held her hand and whispered encouragement. And finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, Helena heard the first outraged cry of her child. "A boy," Mrs. Anderson announced, wrapping the baby in a clean blanket. "A fine, healthy boy." Helena took her son in her arms, tears streaming down her face. He was red and wrinkled and perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. Dalton sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, staring at their child with wonder. "Hello, little one," Helena whispered. "Welcome to the world." They named him Samuel, after Dalton's father who had died when Dalton was young. Samuel Reeves, heir to a ranch on the Dakota prairie, born to parents who loved each other and would love him beyond measure. The winter after Samuel's birth was the hardest Helena had experienced. Caring for an infant in a rough cabin miles from help was exhausting. Samuel cried frequently, especially in the deep of night. Helena was constantly tired, her days blurring together in a fog of feeding and changing and soothing. There were moments when she wanted to cry herself, when she felt overwhelmed and inadequate. But Dalton was there, taking Samuel when he could so Helena could sleep, walking the floor with the crying baby in the middle of the night, supporting her through every difficult moment. And gradually, Samuel grew easier. He began to sleep longer stretches. He smiled at Helena, and her exhaustion melted away in the face of that toothless grin. He learned to grab at things, to roll over, to sit up with support. By spring, Helena felt like herself again. Samuel was a chubby, happy baby who laughed when Dalton tossed him gently in the air and grabbed at Helena's hair with sticky fingers. The ranch was doing well. The cattle had survived the winter with minimal losses. Dalton had money saved to buy more land and expand the herd. The second year of their marriage was easier than the first, not because they loved each other more, but because they had learned how to work together, how to support each other through the hard times and celebrate the good. They were building something real and lasting, a partnership that would sustain them through whatever challenges life brought. In the summer of 1884, Helena discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was harder. She was sick frequently and tired all the time. Samuel was walking now into everything, and keeping up with him while growing another child was exhausting. But she and Dalton managed together, as they always did. Peter, still working at the ranch, helped watch Samuel when Helena needed to rest. Mrs. Anderson visited frequently, bringing food and companionship. The women Helena had sewn for came out to the ranch, ostensibly to bring fabric or pick up finished work, but really to check on her and offer support. This second baby, born in March of 1885, was a girl. She arrived quickly, almost too quickly, with Dalton barely having time to fetch Mrs. Anderson before the baby was born. Helena held her daughter, this tiny perfect creature with wispy blonde hair and blue eyes, and felt her heart expand impossibly larger. "Grace," she said. "Her name should be Grace." Dalton kissed her forehead. "Grace Reeves, it's perfect, she's perfect, you're perfect." Life with 2 children was chaotic. Samuel was an energetic 3-year-old, curious about everything and constantly underfoot. Grace was a placid baby, content to watch the world from Helena's arms or her cradle by the window. The cabin that had seemed spacious with just the 2 of them now felt crowded, but it was a good kind of crowded. The sound of children's laughter filled the rooms. Small clothes hung drying by the fire. Toys cluttered the floor. Dalton expanded the ranch steadily. He bought adjoining land when it became available. The herd grew. He hired more help, young men who wanted to learn ranching, and the small cabin became the center of a working operation. In 1886, Dalton began building a proper house. Not replacing the cabin, but adding to it, creating a large ranch house with multiple bedrooms, a real kitchen, a parlor for receiving guests. It took 2 years to complete, built in stages as money and time allowed. Helena chose paint colors and curtain fabrics, planned where furniture would go, imagined future meals around the large dining table. They moved into the completed house in the spring of 1888. Samuel was 5 and Grace was 3, both of them running from room to room in excitement. Helena stood in the parlor with its large windows overlooking the prairie and felt tears prick her eyes. 6 years ago, she had been on a train to meet a stranger. Now she had a husband she loved, 2 beautiful children, and a house she had helped design and build. She had a thriving business as a seamstress, friends in town and throughout the county, and a place in this community. "Happy?" Dalton asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Completely," Helena said, leaning back against him. "Sometimes I think about that day I got off the train at the wrong stop." "Best wrong stop in history," Dalton murmured. "I was so scared," Helena continued. "Everything had gone wrong. I thought my life was over. But it was really just beginning." Helena turned in his arms to face him. 6 years of marriage had added a few lines around his eyes, a bit more breadth to his shoulders from hard work. But he was still the man who had helped a stranded woman on a train platform, still the man who had offered friendship without expectation, still the man who made her heart race. "I love you," she said. "I don't say it enough, but I do. I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." "I love you too," Dalton said. "Every day I love you more. Every day I'm grateful for that train stopping in Fargo." They kissed while Samuel and Grace shrieked with laughter somewhere upstairs, the sound of their children's joy the sweetest music Helena had ever heard. The years flowed past like the Red River, steady and sure. Samuel grew tall and serious, inheriting his father's work ethic and his mother's thoughtfulness. Grace was bright and energetic, always asking questions, always exploring. In 1890, Helena gave birth to twins, boys they named William and Thomas, who were identical and mischievous and kept everyone on their toes. The ranch prospered. Dalton became known throughout Dakota Territory as a fair employer and a savvy rancher. Helena's seamstress business grew until she was training other women in the craft, passing along her skills. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. In 1893, Helena traveled back to Philadelphia with all 4 children to visit her aunt. She had not been back since leaving 11 years earlier. The city seemed smaller than she remembered, dirtier and more cramped. Her aunt, elderly now and softened by time, cried when she met her great-nieces and nephews. They spent 2 weeks in Philadelphia, and Helena showed her children where she had grown up, the streets she had walked, the dress shop where she had worked. But she was eager to return home. Home was not Philadelphia. Home was a ranch house on the Dakota prairie, a man with storm-colored eyes and the wide sky stretching endlessly overhead. On the train ride back, Samuel, now 10 years old, asked her about the journey that had brought her west. "You got off at the wrong stop, didn't you?" he said. "That's how you met Papa." Helena smiled, remembering. "I did. I was supposed to go to Silver Creek, but I ended up in Fargo instead." "Was it scary?" "Terrifying," Helena admitted. "I thought everything had gone wrong." But sometimes the things that seem like mistakes turn out to be exactly what we need. "So you're glad you got off at the wrong stop." Helena looked at her children, at Samuel with his curious eyes, Grace reading a book in the seat across from them, the twins napping in the compartment's sleeping berth. She thought about Dalton waiting for them at the Fargo station, about the life they had built together, about every joy and challenge they had faced as partners. "I'm glad," she said. "More glad than I can ever say." When the train pulled into Fargo, Dalton was on the platform, just as he had been 11 years earlier. But this time, Helena was not a frightened stranger. She was coming home. The children tumbled off the train and ran to their father, and Dalton caught them up in his arms, laughing. Then he looked at Helena, and the love in his eyes was as strong as it had been the day they married, stronger even, tempered by years of partnership and shared life. "Welcome home," he said, kissing her softly. "Home," Helena repeated, the word sweeter than any she knew. The years continued to pass. The children grew and flourished. Samuel became a skilled rancher, working alongside his father, learning every aspect of the operation. Grace showed an aptitude for numbers and helped manage the ranch accounts. The twins, inseparable as always, were handy with tools and mechanical things, always fixing something or building something new. In 1898, Samuel announced his intention to marry a girl from town, the daughter of the man who had taken over the general store from the Johnsons. The wedding was held at the ranch, a large affair with people coming from all over the county. Helena watched her son exchange vows and remembered her own wedding day in the small church in Fargo, how nervous and hopeful she had been. "Time moves so fast," she said to Dalton as they danced at the reception. "It does," he agreed. "Seems like yesterday you were stepping off that train." 16 years, Helena marveled. 16 years since I made the best mistake of my life. Grace married 2 years later, a young lawyer who had moved to Fargo from St. Paul. She would be moving to town, and Helena felt the loss keenly even as she celebrated her daughter's happiness. The twins showed no signs of settling down, still too busy with their projects and schemes, but Helena did not mind. They were happy, and that was what mattered. In 1902, Samuel and his wife presented Dalton and Helena with their first grandchild, a girl they named Helena after her grandmother. Helena held the tiny baby and cried, overwhelmed by the continuation of life, by the way the story kept unfolding in ways she could never have predicted. That evening, she and Dalton sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the prairie they had worked for 20 years. Helena was 43 now, Dalton 46. They were no longer young, but they were healthy and strong, and the life they had built stretched around them in all directions. "You ever regret it?" Dalton asked. "Staying in Fargo, marrying a cowboy instead of a banker?" Helena laughed. "Not once, not even for a moment. Charles Whitmore did me the greatest favor of my life when he sent that telegram. I thought he was ruining me, but he was really setting me free." "I'm glad," Dalton said, "because these 20 years with you have been the best of my life. Building this place, raising our children, just being with you every day, it's been everything I never knew I wanted." "The cowboy made it right," Helena said softly. "What? I got off at the wrong stop," Helena said, "but the cowboy there made it right. You made everything right, Dalton. From that very first day, you made my wrong turn into the right path." Dalton pulled her close, and they sat together as the stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had shone on them 20 years earlier when they were just beginning their journey together. The prairie stretched endless around them, and somewhere in the house, their granddaughter was sleeping, the next generation of the life they had created. Helena thought about that scared young woman on the train platform, lost and alone and certain her life was over. If she could go back and speak to her younger self, she would say this: trust the journey. Trust the unexpected turns. Trust that sometimes getting off at the wrong stop is exactly what you need to find your way home. But she could not go back, and that was all right. That frightened young woman had found her own way, had discovered her own strength, had taken a chance on a kind cowboy with storm-colored eyes and built a life beyond her wildest dreams. The wind whispered across the prairie, carrying the scent of grass and growing things. Inside the house, Helena could hear the murmur of voices, her children and their families gathered for dinner. This was her life now, Not the one she had planned, but the one she had found, the one she had chosen, the one she had built with her own hands and heart. "I love you," she said to Dalton, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I love you too," he replied. "Always have, always will." They sat on the porch as darkness fell. Two people who had found each other by accident and stayed together by choice. Living proof that sometimes the best destinations are the ones we never plan to reach, and sometimes getting off at the wrong stop is the only way to find your way home. The years ahead would bring more changes, more joys and sorrows, more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. There would be hard winters and dry summers, years of plenty and years of struggle. But through it all, Dalton and Helena would face everything together, partners in the truest sense, bound by love and commitment and the shared history of a life well lived. And on quiet evenings, when the wind sang across the prairie and the stars wheeled overhead, Helena would sometimes think back to that hot August day in 1882, when she stepped off a train in the wrong town and met the right man. She would remember her fear and confusion, her desperation and determination. She would remember storm-colored eyes and a kind smile and a hand extended in friendship. She would remember, and she would smile, grateful for every twist of fate that had brought her here, to this place, to this man, to this beautiful, unexpected life that had started with a simple mistake and become the greatest blessing she had ever known. The wrong stop had become the right destination. The cowboy had made it right. And Helena Porter Reeves, former seamstress from Philadelphia, mail-order bride who never reached her intended destination, had found her home at last.